Welcome into Flag for Discussion, episode 61 for Thursday, January 15th. My name is Farbod and Jace, here as always with the lovely, except right now, he kind of just celebrated my issues, remembering dates, with the lovely Jace Hatfield. Jace, I saw you celebrating right there.
You got it right first take. Didn't have any take twos this week, so that's a big win.
Hey, you know, it's not the easiest thing remembering dates for shows. For those at home who are probably confused about our off-the-rails start, I have had a couple two-take shows because I've said it's December on the first take, and it's not. It's January 15th. And today, Jace, despite the rocky start, we have probably one of our favorite show quality structures set up for everybody. Obviously, we like talking about games. This podcast exists because of the season. This podcast exists because of games. There's nothing fun about college football if the games don't actually happen. But in certain moments like today, where there's no game to talk about on our podcast, we love picking games. We love gambling on games. We love talking about games, previewing games, recapping games, all of that good jazz. There's no game to talk about today. We'll talk about the national title on Sunday. And then the next day, we'll probably recap the national title in an instant reaction type show, maybe coming out Monday night or Tuesday morning. So we'll get you all covered Flag for Discussion style on the national title. Don't you worry. But today we learned a lot of things, and a lot of college football just keeps on going. With Dante Moore, he really doesn't want to be a Jet. We found out the College Football Hall of Fame class we're going to talk about. Transfer portal, hot as ever. It closes this week. We're going to break down who's recently jumped into it. Kind of some more surprising names. The stars are still jumping into it. Jordan Seaton, specifically the offensive tackle from Colorado, he made two videos he made a video through the University of Colorado Athletic Department, who they thought that video was going to announce that he's back at Colorado. Instead, he used it to announce that he's entering the portal, which is unbelievable. And then we have some good conversations about the redshirt rule changing potentially in college football, and Jace is going to get on his soapbox. For the first time in a long time, we have a show that has no games involved, Jace. And I think we're still going to go a very long time talking about it.
Yeah, we can yap for hours. Like every show, whenever we go into a show saying this might only be 40 minutes, this is going to be a short one. It never is. Never ends up that way. It's the same thing like when we were doing our voice memos. There was a period where we were getting to 10-minute voice memos. We're like, all right, we got to dial these back. Granted, we're both like working our 9-to-5s in our desk spaces, so it's not the end of the world. There's worse things you could be doing. But, you know, they get so long where it's impossible to get through without like someone from work sending you a message or asking you questions. So yeah, we can yap. That's not anything new.
We've probably talked about it on this show before, but the reason that those 10-minute voice memos turn into shorter ones is because of this podcast. Because at some point, we got to a point where we were like, why don't we just record this? We're going back and forth. Yeah, we're going back and forth for 40 minutes talking about college football. This might as well just record it and put it out there and hope that people like it and listen. There will also be some housekeeping show announcements at the end of the show, so make sure you stay tuned for that. But for now, make sure you're subscribed to us on YouTube at Flag for Discussion Spelt Out. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts at Flag for Discussion Spelt Out. We had a person, one of our dear friends, ask where they can catch our show, listen to us, watch us. We were like, whatever you like to do. If you like to watch us, check us out on YouTube. If you want to just listen, I do a lot of listening to podcasts because I have long drives. I'm on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can also check us out on Twitter at F4 Discussion. We're also on TikTok at Flag, the number 4 Discussion. All right, Jace, I started the show out by saying that Dante Moore really doesn't want to be a New York Jet. And obviously that's a little tongue-in-cheek, but I also think that's part of the decision-making process here for Dante of like, would I rather spend another year at Oregon or go to be a New York Jet? He announces on ESPN at 12:30 that he's going to be back at Oregon for the 2026 season. Oregon's already brought in Dylan Raiola. I know my camera went blurry. There's people all over the internet saying that Dante Moore just made a ridiculously terrible decision, but partially because of the draft class of this year, quarterback-wise, and next year. Let's start talking about this. What does this first mean for Oregon and Dante Moore?
This is I think when you factor in Dante Moore returning, combined with all the other returning starters that they're bringing in next year, this really does feel like they're going all in for 2026. Last offseason, coming into this year, you and I were heartbroken after that Ohio State Rose Bowl loss, but we had also said 2026 was supposed to be kind of a rebuild growth year. 2025 was the rebuild growth year. 2026 was the calendar circle. That was all these young studs were going to start their first time ever, this past season. And then next year was going to be the big year. And that being the big year hinged on returning Dante Moore. And at the beginning of the season, people didn't quite expect him, I think, to be as the nation as a whole for a draft perspective. I don't think expected him to be as good as he was, especially in NFL draft talks. So that was kind of the big wrench in the 2026 plans. So it's big for Oregon to get that quarterback back. That was a big part of your 2026 plans. And I know based on what it sounds like with teammates, this team has really rallied around him as a leader. So it's big. You get your star quarterback back. You get most likely a first round draft pick next year back and your star leader at quarterback. And all due respect to Dylan Raiola, but I think this is a much different Oregon team if he's QB1 or somebody else than Dante Moore next year. I think Dante Moore is a floor and ceiling raiser, and that's hard to find in college football, somebody with experience who can do those two things. So a big win for the Ducks. I'm sure it didn't come with a cheap price tag by any means, but certainly I'm sure this was probably agenda item number one, and that gives you a lot of hope going into next year.
Yeah, we'll get into the money side of this in like 2 minutes, but you're right. One of the things that we talked about a ton, and you just covered it, entering this season is this might be a 9-3, 10-2 season for Oregon, depending on how Dante adjusts to playing college football again. Obviously, he took the year at UCLA, then he took a year off, not off, but he backed up Dylan Gabriel, and no one really knew. Everyone assumed he was going to be good, but no one really knew how good he was going to be. Oregon kind of punched above its weight class. One of the things I was worried about on this show earlier this season, saying like this might be a bit of a down year. I still don't like they have an easy schedule, so I don't know how many. I don't think they're going to take too many losses. But if Dante's not the guy that we think he is, this could be a down year. And I was a little worried that from us, people knowing what our fandom is, that they would think, oh, that's them just trying to set up excuses already for the Ducks. And Oregon punched above his weight class. And to be honest, we all think that we all know that Dante played his worst game of the year in that semifinal game. There's no getting around that. But for what it's worth, you already hit the nail on the head. Oregon, it's been no secret. A couple years ago, after they had the massive recruiting class that brought in so many defensive linemen, especially, and they've put in a lot of money for Decory Moore last year, there's no secret that Oregon had 2026 circled as this is the year that we're going to be good other years, but this is the year that we're going to go for it. This is the year that it's all gas, no brakes, natty or bust type of year. And we can have a conversation of like natty or bust might be a dangerous thing. I mean, we saw how that kind of dismantled Penn State this year. You and I picked Penn State and Clemson to be right up there, and they both went into the season saying we're going to be really special. Do you think that could be a danger for Oregon despite all that they're returning?
Fingers crossed, but I think no. Mainly in the sense that Dan Lanning doesn't strike me as a coach who's on the hot seat. He doesn't really strike me as a coach who's on the downfall. James Franklin, I think, had a long tenure at Penn State that was in that stage where it's either he wins a championship or we fire him. Although I know with Clemson has been also in a spot where Clemson fans are ready to move on from him. I don't think Dan Lanning, I know that Dan Lanning is not there yet. Still very young. He's only been here for 4 years, and a head coach for 4 years. He's still growing. He's still learning. Fans love him. So I don't think Oregon's in danger of a 6-6 season ahead. This is a team that won 11-1. And for Penn State and Clemson both, a lot of their players they returned were from fourth-year guys to fifth-year guys. This Oregon team is first-year guys. Brandon Finney going into year 2. It's year 2 guys. You have Peyton Woodard, Iffy going into year 3. You have year 3 guys going into year 4. Dante Moore, Jeremiah McClellan, a lot of the offense. So I think you have a mix of guys of different draft classes, right? There's going to be a lot of guys that start for Oregon next year who are going to have to come back again another year. I think Oregon has enough like parity amongst their roster to not be in a, hey, we have to win a national championship not to say national championship or bust, but like we're going to go 6-6 the way Penn State did or
Right.
Clemson did. I think this is a team whose floor next year, we'd have to iron out the schedule, but the floor is going to be probably 10 wins.
Yeah, I mean they do have a tougher schedule next year than they do this year. They go to Ohio State, they go to USC. There's, I mean, we all know about Ohio State. You probably going to be really damn good next year too. They're bringing back their quarterback. We'll get you our way too early top 15 or top 25. Maybe Jace will make that up for our first off-season episode. Don't just at least trust me for now that USC is going to be really good, and the rest of the Big Ten is going to be pretty solid, especially compared to this year's Oregon schedule. But with that said, like you said, Oregon is pretty set at receiver. They brought in a kid, I think, from UAB a couple days ago from the transfer portal at receiver. They have Decory Moore. Evan Stewart looks like he's returning. At running back, Jordan Davison, hopefully he gets healthy. De'Aaron Hill's going to be there. You probably need to add one or two more running backs. The big question is offensive line, and we'll get into who their options are. Jordan Seaton, the Colorado tackle, we've already mentioned him once already. He's going to be an option there. I do think it warrants a conversation of what does this mean for Dante Moore? Because despite like the goods, we know that Oregon's going to be paying him a good hefty sum to return. And the conversation, or at least the rumors before Dante had made this announcement, was if Dante goes to the draft, yes, they brought in Dylan Raiola, but Oregon's going to put a hefty offer in for Ty Simpson. Chris Lowe had a really good article talking to Ty Simpson, talking about how Miami offered him $6.5 million, Tennessee offered him $4 million, Ole Miss offered him somewhere in between, and those numbers have been verified. But he still said, if I were to do that, I would lose everything I built in the 4 or 5 years I was at Alabama. So I was like, I respect that. But the conversation was, if Dante goes to the draft, Oregon's going to put a hefty sum in for Ty Simpson or another quarterback to come in and be the starter while Dylan Raiola recovers from his injury and gets ready for 2027. But I think the discussion now is there's all these draft analysts. There's so many people that are saying Dante would have been number 2. He would have gotten paid a ton of money. But there's other draft analysts that are saying, man, Dante, you have 20 college football career starts. I think historically on like a 30-year basis, don't quote me on this stat, but I know it is about this region. Every Super Bowl quarterback in the last 30 years has had at least 30, 35 career college football starts. No one has won a Super Bowl who's had less than that many starts. So Dante's sitting at around 20. Part of that is just because college gives you experience and gives you another game to read defenses. What do you make of this decision for Dante himself?
Yeah, the stat, I think it was 32 games was the number. And then I think it was capped, like no one was over like 48 or something like that. I think it was a smart decision for Dante. I know a lot of people are going to say you are the bona fide number 2 pick. You don't want to risk it. I've seen people saying, what if he pulls a Drew Al or a Cade Klubnik? I think Dante, I'll be honest, I think he's too good of a quarterback. He was like prodded as generational, and he has been. I think he's too good of a quarterback, and I think Oregon is too good of a system for him to have a 6-6 year where he's just awful.
He could get hurt though, like Drew Aller.
He could get hurt, and that's a risk any football player. When you put on pads and you play football, you run the risk of getting hurt. Like that's just a reality of the sport. I don't think you can make football decisions out of fear of getting hurt. I don't know why you'd play the sport if that was the case. But also, I think the 20 starts is a big thing. Dante, as we saw, when they played the most NFL-like defenses, when they played defenses like Indiana, who have a lot of veteran players and have a creative defensive scheme, teams that have defensive level talent, Penn State, he was slow to start that game. Iowa, granted, it was in the rain, but that's a very strong defense. He was rattled. You could see that he was visibly rattled. You could see he struggled to contain his emotions. You could see he just looked a little stoic in a way that he looked like he just really didn't understand what was going on. There was a lot of, for every 5 flashes of him looking like a superstar quarterback, there was 1 or 2 moments where he just didn't make a read that he would have wide open touchdowns where he would miss the read and make a terrible decision with the football. He took a lot of sacks that were not necessary to take. He had his checkdowns readily available. And this is something that a lot of scouts have called out about Dante Moore, saying there's the little things that he misses. He misses his 3rd read that was open for a touchdown. He held onto the ball instead of taking this check down, and it resulted in a fumble versus a 7-yard gain. That's part of his game, unfortunately, this past year. And I would say that was probably what held Oregon back from taking the next step. That's something you have to learn, especially if you're going to get drafted to the New York Jets. That's a team that is not built for you to come in and be a stud day one. It's just not. They don't have the offensive line. They don't have the offensive pieces. They don't have the coaching
They're also the
take in
Jets.
back. Yeah, it's the Jets. They just don't have the scenario to bring in a young QB and help him succeed. And I think most people would agree with this, especially people that watch the NFL. And Kevin O'Connell has said it, so he's the NFL head coach. Teams and schemes and coaches and systems fail young quarterbacks. Young quarterbacks don't fail teams. That's a Kevin O'Connell statement. That's one I agree with. And I think the Jets are just not in a position to help Dante Moore out. And Dante Moore has the luxury of making this decision. I think part of it was, hey, man, the combination of you being pretty raw and having a lot that you need to work on, combined with you'd be going to a team who, quite frankly, is not ready for a young quarterback to succeed. I don't think you going to the Jets would be a match made in heaven. I think it would be a great short-term bet. Obviously, he'd be the number 2 overall pick. I'm sure the math on the money for that is going to be astronomically more than he would make at Oregon. But on the flip side of that, you set yourself up to be potentially a horrible NFL quarterback for 2 or 3 years. And we've seen what happens with young QBs. They get thrown in bad situations. And unless you're lucky, like a Sam Darnold, where a good team is willing to give you a chance, a lot of these guys just fizzle out and never do anything anymore. So there is a little bit of security in Dante Moore's mind, I would have to imagine, that says, come back to school. Let's work on these things that I know I'm lacking. Let's say he does improve them. Then when he goes to the draft next year, sure, it's probably going to be a high draft pick to a team that's not great, but at least he's better and more well equipped to be successful in the NFL. And in that case, if it's the Jets again, maybe this year they take a really good offensive tackle early in the draft. Maybe they take some really good pieces. That way, if it is Dante Moore next year to the Jets, at least they're one more tackle ready to go, and Dante Moore's ready to go, increasing his chances. Because they always say it's that second contract in the NFL. That's the life-changing, the genuine, like, tried and true life-changing money. That first contract, a lot of guys spend it. A lot of guys don't use it wisely, but it's that second contract that really sets you apart. And I think you got to do everything possible to set yourself up for that second contract. And I think leaving this year would have not set himself up for that. And that's what he said today on ESPN. So I assume that he's speaking the truth.
The first contract makes you rich. The second contract creates generational wealth.
Yes,
if everything goes right, or at least you're set up for the rest of your life. So I have a couple of things that I agree with you on. I mean, I agree with everything you said. Dante, I think it should be noted that this is also a sign of just like a personal growth for a human. Dante Moore, when he was in high school, he was committed to Oregon for 12 months, 9 months, whatever it was. Kenny Dillingham, the Oregon offensive coordinator, takes the Arizona State job, and Dante ends up decommitting, looking around a little bit. The day before signing day, he commits to UCLA. And part of that was, it's not like he's a Southern California kid. He's from Michigan. Part of that was like maybe UCLA came in with an NIL deal. He didn't know who the offensive coordinator at Oregon would be, and he knew he was going to go to Chip Kelly, who, if anything else, he's a brilliant offensive mind. So that happened. It didn't work out for him. He wanted to start your day one, and he was in a bit of a rush to play right away as a high school kid. And then he decides to take a year. He decides to go to Oregon, take a year where he sits behind Dylan Gabriel, continues to develop, continues to learn, and he takes over the job 1 year at Oregon, and he's projected to be the number 2 overall pick. And I think high school Dante, that mentality would have said, all right, I'm going to take the $52 million that's guaranteed to me. I'm going to go live out my dream. And I love Oregon, but I just want to get to the NFL right now. And that you can't fault a kid for saying that. You can't fault anyone who's saying like, okay, not only is the money going to be crazy, but I can also go live out my dream of playing in the NFL. But he also is realizing that dream will be there next year. God willing, everything goes right. He doesn't even have to win the national title or a playoff game, but God willing, everything goes right. That dream will be there for him next year. But what can also be there for him is Oregon continues to get better. Probably will be in New York for the Heisman ceremony next year. He probably will be in the playoff next year. He probably will be playing in some very meaningful games and continue to raise his draft stock. The conversation now is, is it only a mistake? Is it not a mistake if sorry, let me restart that. If we're saying it's not a mistake because he chose to forego the 52.5 million that would have been guaranteed to him if he was drafted second overall. By the way, $34 million signing bonus that would be immediately deposited into his bank account. He could have as good of a year as he did this year, and he could not be selected in the top 5 next season. If this season, think about it like this: Fernando Mendoza, we can expect to go number 1. So I'm playing devil's advocate here. Fernando Mendoza, we can expect to go number 1. After that, he would be competing with Ty Simpson, Trinidad Chambliss, Carson Beck, Kate Klubnik, and Drew Aller, and a whole host of other quarterbacks. Garrett Nussmeier, that were once thought of as first rounders, but as like the number 2 quarterback in the draft. So the competition for him, in essence, is much lower for him to be able to get drafted that high. Next year, theoretically, the early look at the 2027 draft class, this sleeper tweeted this. It's Dante Moore, Arch Manning, Darian Mensah, Julian Sayin, Sam Levitt, Lenore Sellers, and Brennan Sorsby. You could tell me that's a 7 quarterback first round. Obviously, we're sitting here January 15th, and we'll say last year this time we were saying that about Garrett Nussmeier, and that didn't work
I was
out. We
going
were
to
saying that
say,
about Kenny Klubnik. That
I
didn't
saw
work
that
out.
tweet, and my immediate debunk of that tweet was this time last year, everyone was like, the 2026 QB class is loaded. It has Drew Aller, Lenora Sellers, Cade Klubnik, Garrett Nussmeier, all those guys stunk. And when you say that list, like, I'll be honest, I don't think Brennan Sorsby really has this ceiling where he's going to be a stud NFL QB. Sam Levitt comes with question marks. Try to think of the other names that you have. Arch Manning is the bona fide one. Darian Mensah, I think it has a high floor, low ceiling NFL team. Like, you could pick apart any QB class
Lenore
ever.
Sellers.
Yeah, you look at what happened to him this year versus next year, he could turn it back on. I think if you're Dante, you can't really bank on other QBs and how they're going to perform. I think you can focus on yourself and what you can do to help yourself out. And I also think, yes, the draft class is supposed to be a lot stronger next year. And let's say that it is, and it does push him to pick 7 versus pick 2. You make a little bit of less money, and that would be true for sure. But like I said, I think in his head, the decision was for that second contract, for the longevity of his career in the NFL. I think he knows he's probably sacrificing a lot of money in the short term to do this. But I also think he's banking on his development and him saying, this is the difference between me being a bust and being out of the NFL in 4 years, and the difference between me being a 15-year veteran and holding up a Lombardi one day. I think that's what he's banking on. And dare I say, I think I don't know if he's ever said this. I don't think he has out loud, at least to the media. I think the first time around when he picked UCLA, because they probably offer a little bit more NIL and they were offering immediate playing time, and he skipped out on the opportunity to go redshirt behind Bo Nix. And then he came back to Oregon the year after. I have to imagine he's recognized I made the mistake once of chasing the money, chasing the exciting, chasing the fun. I think he's learned his lesson of like chasing the best thing in the moment isn't always what's best for me. And I think this was the same thing where going to the draft is probably a lot of fun. You get to be an NFL pick. You get to go second overall. You get to be in New York. It's exciting. The money is there. But I think he also looks at it and says, that's also this is a great way for my career to die within 2 years. Go to a team that's just not ready for a young QB to come in and compete. I myself am raw. That doesn't sound like a match made in heaven to me. And I think he said, I'm going to take the delayed gratification here and make the decision that I think is better for my future. I think he didn't make that decision last time. And I mean, he kind of alluded to it when he said today on ESPN about how, like, I've learned my lesson about like chasing things in life, and I want to think more level-headed about my future. And that's why he made the decision he did. So I think that might have been code word for I fucked up once, I'm not going to do it again. This all obviously hinges. I think this talent for Dante is there where I don't see a world where he stinks. My fear with him would be injury. He's a pretty frail person. He's not very big. And he took a lot of hits this year, unnecessary, because he refused to check down or throw the ball away a few times. Something he'll hopefully work on, but knock on wood, I think the injury is the one thing that would scare me.
Well, that shows the fact that he's had 20 college starts and he needs more. And
exactly,
we covered it in our recap earlier this week on the Oregon Indiana game. There were multiple throws that he didn't make because of that, because he was just hesitant to do it. And he needs to get with someone that's going to be like, it doesn't matter if you end up in an interception. If you see a play that you know your arm can make more often than not, because you're so special and you're so talented, you're going to make that play, but you can't be so hesitant upstairs to do that. I think also we have to say, like, he was going to be a Jet more likely than not. And for what it's worth, the Jets are where quarterbacks go to die. I had one of my best buddies. He's coming to my wedding. You'll meet him in June. He's a Jets fan, and he promised me. He said the second we get Dante, I'm buying you a more Jets jersey. And I said I'll put it right behind me. But I don't think you're going to get him because I don't think he's coming out of college, out of Oregon this year. But maybe the Jets are bad. Maybe they'll be back here next year. The only last point I want to make on this, and I play devil's advocate saying all the quarterbacks that are projected to be in the first round next year. I also want to say, like, the worst thing for Dante, let's say he has a great season, but Arch, Darian Mensah, like 6 of those quarterbacks have also great seasons. And then it just becomes a PR war trying to figure out who's the best quarterback in the draft. Let's say Dante falls to 9. You think it'd be better to go at 2 to the Jets or 9 to a better team? Or what if he falls to, like, you think Bo Nix is mad that he was drafted 11? You think he's closer to a second contract with the with the Broncos, or he would have been closer to the second contract if he was drafted by the Titans or the Bears? Bears are a bad example right now, but sometimes situation matters the most. And Patrick Mahomes is an elite quarterback.
100%.
He probably would have been an elite quarterback anywhere he went, but he probably wouldn't have had the Super Bowls he has if he was drafted by the Jets, or the contract he has, or his endorsements, or the verification that he's one of the best quarterbacks ever already at this age. So there's a lot to keep covering. Oregon's going to be really good next year. Let's get into something that one of their coach was involved in. Cody Nagel from CBS posted a article where he ranked the top 18 coaches that are Nick Saban's coaching tree that's active as a head coach in college football right now, and his 18 coaches. He ranked them number 1, Kirby Smart, then Curt Cignetti, Dan Lanning, Mario Cristobal at 4, Steve Sarkisian, Lane Kiffin, Brent Key, Pete Golding, Lance Taylor, Charles Huff, Billy Napier, Charles Kelly, Alex Mortensen, Tosh Lupoy, Mike Loxley, Major Applewhite, Bill O'Brien, and Butch Jones. Those are the 18 coaches that were on Nick Saban's staff at one point, and they are now FBS head coaches at different locations. So he ranked them this way. Kirby Smart, I think we can close the conversation. Obviously, he's number 1 on that list.
Yeah.
Curt Cignetti, you can tell me that he deserves number 2, and I'll buy that. But at the same time, like, I don't know if look, he's about to win a national title, so I sound like a goofball saying this. Or he's about to play for a national title. I sound like a goofball saying this. But Curt Cignetti at number 2 is a little bit of a prisoner of the moment kind of thing. Like, it's just like, I think Kalen DeBoer is an excellent coach, but a couple years ago when he was coming out of Washington, he was 25-3 in 2 years at Washington. Everyone was saying this guy's the next Saban. This guy knows more about coaching than anybody. He's a genius. And it's like, no, he's a really good coach, but things can happen when you coach at Alabama. Like, I don't know. Can we wait 4 years 2 years, 1 year before we put Chris Cignetti number 2? But that's my soapbox there. Sark's an excellent coach. Mario Cristobal is an excellent coach. Obviously, all of these guys are excellent coaches. I mean, where do you want to start on this conversation? Do you want to discuss the ranking, or do you want to talk about the coaching tree itself?
I want to talk about the coaching tree itself, because Kirby Smart, Curt Cignetti, Dan Lanning, Mario Cristobal, Steve Sarkisian, Lane Kiffin, Brent Key, Pete Golding. I'm going to pause there. That is going to be like at the end of next season. Or maybe we'll put a bookmark in this. The end of next season, those coaches, there's a realistic path for all of them to be in the college football playoff next year.
They were all
I could see
Saban had the Final Four.
Yeah, Kirby Smart, Curt Cignetti, Dan Lanning, Mario Cristobal, all of them were in the playoff. Then, Pete Golding was in the Final Four. You're missing Sark, Lane Kiffin, Brent Key. Brent Key was almost there. Needed a few more games at the end of the season.
Sark will probably be there.
Sark will probably be there, and Lane's got LSU, so there's always a chance that he's going to be in there too. Pretty impressive stuff. After Pete Golding, no knock to any of these guys, but I don't think any of them are going to be college football playoff coaches. But that's damn impressive. He could literally have half the playoff to his name. And that just goes to show the influence he's had on the sport. And kind of, if you look at the way a lot of these guys build programs, they're all pretty similar. And it's all because it's the way that Nick Saban had done it, which kind of leads, we'll have the conversation after the portal and my soapbox, which we'll talk a little bit about that. But yeah, one of my first thing when I was reading that, those first 7-8 names there, I was like, that could be the college football playoff next year.
Yeah. No, if you think about it, okay, Kirby has 2 national titles. Curt Cignetti, Dan Lanning, Mario Cristobal haven't won one. But one of Curt Cignetti or Mario Cristobal are going to end up with one. And we talked about, and if it's Curt Cignetti, we talked last show about how everyone who's hating on Mario isn't understanding that college football is set up perfectly for him. Everything he learned under Saban, he's taking that and modernizing it with the current college football landscape. And I think Miami could be back again next year. We'll see who their quarterback is. That's the big last domino that hasn't fallen yet in the transfer portal cycle. Miami needs a quarterback still for 2026. But I mean, Sark was just out of the playoff this year. We talked about it last show again. They loaded up. They could be in the Final Four next year. Brent Key, like you said, excellent football coach. They just got Justice Haynes at Georgia Tech. They could be in the college football playoff next year. This coaching tree is insane. I don't know. Like, we'll get into Hall of Fame talk in about 15 minutes. I don't know. Is any of these coaches going to have their own tree that even sniffs this?
Kirby would have been the obvious choice, but he hasn't really had that big of a coaching tree, especially if you consider most of his coaching tree guys were Saban guys. So like Kirby Smart's own guys, he really hasn't created much of a tree of like non-Saban Kirby Smart guys. Curt Cignetti is somebody who, in terms of their scheme and execution, you would absolutely think so. But to the detriment of his own coaching tree, but to the benefit of himself, he has so few coaches leave him just because the way he operates, the way he works, keeps guys around. How he was saying, like, I tell my guys to leave at 5. He treats them, sounds like he treats them very well with respect. So that's a coaching tree that doesn't grow a lot just because he retains everybody. One tree that is growing fast, and I hate saying it because it's a homer pick, but it is a tree that has now produced 3 head coaches, would be Dan Lanning. It's factual. I think of these guys, he would be the one. Also, age plays into this, right? Like Curt Cignetti, Kirby Smart, a little bit older at this point. The odds of them dropping 15 to 18 guys as a coaching tree would be pretty astronomical. But someone like Dan, who's not even 40 yet, he would be the only one possible. He's already got 3. He's the only one possible to sniff this. Even that, I'm not sure he will. 18 is pretty remarkable.
I also think, how do I put this? College football's gotten to a point where I think woke's the wrong word. Coaches are a little softer than they were like 10 years ago. Nick Saban would have been pissed if you took one of his guys. Sark just took Will Muschamp from Kirby. Like, these guys are sharing assistants a little bit now. And obviously they want to keep their assistant coaches on their staff. But these guys are, like you said, since so many of them are from the same tree, they start believing the same things. Now, Sark has coached everywhere. He's had coaching jobs before. He's coached in the NFL. Once he got to Saban, he was a ready-made coach. He just was kind of rebuilding his image a little bit. Mario Cristobal, Dan Lanning. I know Mel Tucker is taboo to bring up, but like, those guys started their like ascension in college football under Nick Saban. So everything that they did to build a program was from the Nick Saban blueprint. It is interesting to me, and here's a question for you. It is interesting, and we'll kind of combining NFL and college. We never have seen a Belichick disciple of the Patriot era succeed as a head coach, because those guys might be the best coordinators of all time. Josh McDaniels, Matt Patricia, Brian Flores, list can go on and on of the Belichick era. Bill O'Brien was offensive coordinator there. But the second one of those guys gets a head coaching job, they try to turn into Bill, and it doesn't work out, and all of a sudden those guys are like, the only person that can be curmudgeon, the only person that can be grouchy and do the same things with the media, the only person that can be this disciplinarian is the person who's doing it genuinely, and that's Bill Belichick. Yes. But we've seen so many of Saban's disciples turn into major college football names, voices, head coaches. We've seen his players become big time stars too. I see Nick Saban is to Bill Belichick as to what Kirby Smart is to Nick Saban. It's Nick Saban, Bill Belichick were best friends. Nick probably learned a little bit as an assistant under Saban. Now Kirby's did the same thing under Saban. Is there a reason why like a GOAT coach in the NFL can't have his assistants have the same amount of success as Saban?
Great question. This is an answer that I'm kind of have on the fly, so I'm not gonna I wouldn't like take this as truth for anyone listening. Not that you should take anything I say for truth, but
We're the truth tellers. What are you talking about?
unless it's my ranking, any rankings I give, truth. Any opinions, you can debate us on, flag for discussion. We'll get in there. But my gut feeling would be that college football, you have a lot higher variance of head coaches, number one. And two, I think there's a lot more different style, like variance in head coaches in the sense of styles and also quality of a coach. I think the top coaches in college football are insanely high quality, and the bad programs, those coaches, I think, are probably pretty terrible quality, and that variance is huge. I think in the NFL, all 32 NFL head coaches are damn good football coaches. So I think it's hard to separate yourself. And I also think in the NFL, these are like grown men, right? Like these are adults, and you can't necessarily, like how you were saying, you can't, and not everybody can just be a curmudgeon and it's accepted. I think like Bill Belichick, since that's truly him, and that's the image he's had for so long, I think he gets away with it. And I think when these younger, Matt Patricias of the world try and get into a locker room and like treat these grown men who are almost the same age as you try to treat them like they're beneath you. I just don't think that flies in the NFL, which a lot of these guys, they try to just replicate Bill Belichick and it doesn't work. Where I think in college, you can replicate the grouchy frustrations of Nick Saban because these are 18, 19, 20-year-olds for the most part, especially for a lot of these bigger teams. I think you can kind of just copy paste Nick Saban a little bit. And if you copy paste him, since these are like kids and teenagers, they're a lot more receptive to the, like, if you're going to yell at them. And I also just think you can be the head coach at Texas. Like, let's say, I think Sark is a good coach, but let's say Sark was a bad coach. With the resources and the recruiting of Texas, you can still be a bad head coach and still beat up on like bottom feeder teams. In the NFL, if you're a bad head coach, those teams, they're just too good. Like they'll eat you alive.
Yeah.
And so I think it's probably the combination of the leagues themselves. And then also, I think you can't treat a grown man the way Bill Belichick does unless you're Bill Belichick. But you can treat a teenager the way Nick Saban does, even if you're not Nick Saban, maybe.
Well, to that point, though, I think Nick Saban has shown. I mean, Belichick went to TV for a year. He was actually surprisingly good on TV. But we saw Nick Saban on TV right now, and the guy's personable. The guy's fun. He makes jokes. He smiles. Like he shows you a glimpse of, yes, at Alabama we had a standard and we adhered to it, but we also we weren't like fully doomsday on the kids. It was an environment to grow and learn and build yourself as young men. And I think where Belichick's system was a lot of my way or the highway, they had Brady and a lot of the things was set and it was called the Patriot way. I think Saban, I can't name one off the top of my head, but Saban caused a lot of rule changes in the SEC during his prime because people were afraid of Saban's modernization. He kept innovating the program, kept advancing the program, and Belichick eventually got to the point, and I know this isn't an NFL show, but he eventually got to the point where he wanted his guys on his staff. Saban wanted the best guys on his staff and the best GAs, the best DCs, the best offensive coordinators. Lane Kiffin, he didn't love him, but he was like, I need to innovate my offense. I need to go away from the old school offenses to a new school offense. Lane Kiffin's the best guy. Then Sark, Bill O'Brien even came in to be his OC. I think part of it is just Saban wanted to adapt and develop as much as he could, and he was a lot better at that, and he was more open and personable and honest with his players and everything than Belichick was. But that was a tangent right there. Transfer portal, something that Nick Saban rarely had to deal with until his latter days. There's been some big news. Do you want to break down the big news at first?
I do. So this came out, like we haven't even talked about this. So this will be our first time hashing each other's thoughts out on the show. So the NCAA has moved back. I know it's not a college basketball show, but it's important. They moved back the college basketball transfer portal window for both men and women's basketball to start the day after their respective national championship games. The same like 2-week period. That's the reason why this is a big move, is because maybe this is something that we see in college football hopefully soon. They did it pretty easily, and it kind of came out of nowhere. Like this seems like something that we would have heard a lot about, like leading up to it, the way that when they changed the college football playoff, and it's always like the first big news is they're beginning to talk about it, and then there's 10 more big news stories about where it's going until you finally get the big one to break. This kind of came out of nowhere. It just broke. I didn't know this was a conversation they were having. And then all of a sudden it was just, here's the new transfer portal window for these sports. I like how easy and quick that happened. And the reason why I wanted to put it here is, do you think that's something that we could do with football next year? Or do you think it's a little bit more convoluted? Or is it as easy as they made it seem?
I think it's too convoluted. I think we see college football is a system that has had National Signing Day in the winter, in January, February time. And then they said, okay, we want early National Signing Day. They added that in December. I got to use December correctly in the show. They added that in December. And then outside of that, they had bowl games. And now they've trying to marry a bowl games season with the college football playoff. Those two systems that don't work, but there's contracts involved in both sides, so they have to make both of them work. I almost feel like the only way you can do this is to bring up what Joey McGuire, Kurt Signetti, Dan Lanning have been saying for weeks now, is start the season earlier, play your playoff games throughout the month of December, and start the transfer portal. Have the national title game be the Rose Bowl on January 1st. Have the transfer portal open January 2nd. So then everyone's done playing, coaches are done coaching, and like if your coordinator took a head coaching job somewhere, there's a dead period all of December just so he can focus completely on, yes, he has to build out his staff at the new place, but he can focus solely on winning games for your current team, which we saw hurt Oregon this year with Will Stein and Tosh Lupoy. I think it's convoluted because there's also a matter of the reason the early National Signing Day is because teams, I mean, they'll give you all these reasons, but teams want players in their program earlier. If you look at a bunch of teams' rosters right now, or early signing day signees, they joined the team in January for their winter semester or winter quarter, depending on the school's academic calendar. You have to base it off of, you have to deal with like academic calendars here too, and you have to deal with early National Signing Day. Maybe you push that back a little bit, but then you're now trying to combine a high school academic calendar with a college academic calendar. I'm not saying it can't be done, because we've seen when people in high positions that have a lot of money have incentive to get something done, it'll get done immediately. It'll get done for the next year. Maybe this is a test trial to see how it goes in the NCAA, and I'm glad that they did this. I just don't think this is something that they can start talking about tomorrow and implement in 2026. I feel like this has to be a 2 or 3 year waiting period of like plan and prep.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. And I think what makes basketball a little bit easier as well is roster size. Rosters are just a lot smaller. So I think it's
Yeah.
easier to move transfer portal dates because it was because of smaller rosters. If you're a student athlete in college as a basketball player, there's 13 people on your team, and you can kind of get an idea pretty easily about what the team's going to look like. And like recruiting classes are usually 2 to 4 players. So you kind of have a pretty good idea of what the team's roster is going to look like in future years. So I feel like kids are the decision to transfer or not is a little bit simpler in college basketball. I think there's 12 other teammates. No, these 3 are graduating, and you've already talked to these 2 guys. You know they're just kind of on the bench and they're never really going to play. And then these 3 guys you've talked to, and you think they're all going to transfer, and then these 4 are going to stay. And you're kind of like, oh, well, I might as well stay. I'll be, I know they're going to need a wing, and I'm a wing. So the worst case, I'm a 6th man. Best case, I'm starting. I'll stay. And you look at your recruiting class. Oh, we only got 1 wing, and he's good, but I don't think he's going to be a freshman that'll take over my playing time. Whereas in football, when you have 113 or however many it is on these rosters, it's a lot harder to get intel on what everybody's going to do. With recruiting classes being 20 to 35 guys, it's a lot harder to tell where people stand. So I'm with you. I think it is convoluted, giving me hope. This came out of nowhere. I had no idea they were talking about changing the college football transfer portal window. The fact it was as easy as it was, thank you, basketball. I'm hoping that means football will be a little harder, but since basketball was so easy, a little harder still isn't a big deal. But also, I know they're way more distracted with football too, because they're talking about the playoff right now. I know the schedule and the calendar, even just not just transfer portal, but bowl season, bye weeks, everything. That's a big mess. So I think there's a lot more to hash out. Whereas with the college basketball schedule and season, that's pretty down pat. It's pretty perfected at this point. So the only real tabled issue right now was the transfer window. So I'm with you. I do think there's more at play with football right
The only thing I ask the NCAA is don't just drop it on us without any instruction like you did NIL.
now. Yeah.
Any barrier. So you could do this, but if there's no like barrier of like you know what I mean? Like if
Yeah.
there's no guidelines or instructions to it, then it's just gonna lead to even more of a mess and more confusion. I mean, I was thinking about this earlier, and I promise we'll get to the college football thing. Imagine I mean, do you have any family abroad out of this country?
Not living, but actually traveling, yes. Oddly
Okay.
enough.
So imagine you had family that doesn't know much about American sports, but they saw college football, they think it's interesting, and they like NFL at least. Imagine how long would you have to sit down with them and explain to them everything about college football? Like, because and I feel like it would take 2 hours and they'd still be confused. From the calendar to the players to how you get players to coaches leaving another team in the middle of the season, the players leaving in the middle of the playoff. It's like, what is going on? I really hope the NCAA doesn't set us up for a situation like that.
Yeah. They have so many great questions too of like, why do they do it this way? Why is it like that? Why don't they just wait till after the season? Why is it done there? And you'd be like, hey, that's what we're all you'd be like, great question. That's the same question we ask every day and we don't get answers to. I feel like that would
This is
be how that conversation goes.
the conversation would eventually will be why is the NCAA in charge? We're like, we ask that all the time too. And it's just going to be this. I was like, you're so smart. But we've also been saying this for 10 years now. All right, getting back to actual transfer portal news. Husan Longstreet, the USC quarterback transfer, is going to LSU. He's going to back up Sam Levitt. LSU's brought in like 4 quarterbacks in from the site from the transfer portal. Husan Longstreet is interesting because he got a little run this year. Everyone just expected 5-star kid going to Lincoln Riley. This is going to be his next masterpiece. And it is kind of shocking to me to see a quarterback leave Lincoln Riley. But this is today's day and age. And we covered it last show of these kids. If they make the pros, good for them. If they don't, this is their highest earning potential of their entire life in these 4 years. So he wants to go somewhere where he can at least get paid now and then get paid more for when he plays. We also knew that other than Ty Simpson, if Dante Moore were to go to the NFL, Oregon would have courted Husan Longstreet to sit behind probably Dylan Raiola or maybe start over him. So he's ending up at LSU. The big conversation to talk about is Jordan Seaton. He's the elite left tackle out of Colorado. If you remember a couple years ago, he committed on FS1 on Skip Bayless's show, Undisputed. He was between Oregon and Colorado out of high school, and everyone thought day in day out there was a flip flop. It was like, oh, I think it's Oregon, I think it's Colorado, I think it's Oregon. The day of, people were like, I think it's Oregon. 5 minutes before, said no, I think it's Colorado, and that was part of the pull of and charm of Dion. It was like he needs to fix his offensive line. He has the ability to recruit unlike any other coach in the country can because he is Deion Sanders. Now he's losing this kid to the portal. The early favorites, as you have highlighted here, are Oregon, LSU, and Texas, each of which I think are ready to back up a Brinks truck for him.
Yeah, it's going to be an arms race. Like the money that he ends up making is going to be more than any tackle in the portal, and it's going to be a lot. These are 3 teams competing. I know Texas just got a tackle out of the portal, but from the sounds of it, that didn't mean that they're not going after Jordan Seaton. LSU, obviously, with how much they've invested in quarterbacks, and I believe they told Lane they had 25 to 30 million ready to go for him to start firing away. Sam Levitt, I'm sure, commanded a good amount of that, but outside of him, like Harold Perkins is going to the draft. That frees up a good chunk of change for him. It'll be interesting to see who comes out. I think Oregon and LSU, now that Texas has shored up the other tackle position, I do think their need for Seaton decreases a little bit. So to me, it's going to be Oregon or LSU. I think both schools could really use a tackle. Both schools are going to have the money to get him. I think both schools have the coach, the juice, the brand, the energy to bring him in. It'll be interesting. He didn't pick Oregon the first time around. We'll be curious if he does or doesn't pick them the second time around. Obviously, you know where Farbod and I stand on where he would like to go. And truthfully, this is an insanely talented kid. He's going to be just fine competing for championships. He's going to be a first-round draft pick either way. So there's not really, I don't really think there's a wrong or right decision between Texas, LSU, and Oregon. At that point, it's like, where do you want to be personally for yourself, for your growth as a person? Because I think as a football player, you're going to compete at the top of the game at all three of those schools. You're going to get paid a lot at all three of those schools. You're going to get developed at all three of those schools. So at this point, you got to pick where your heart goes. And obviously, you know where Farbod and I land on that.
All three of those schools are also desperate for him. And you mentioned Texas brought in a tackle. Oregon brought in a tackle, the Yale tackle. But there's a difference between bringing a good tackle and bringing in an elite tackle that's going to shore up your quarterback's blind side. Texas is desperate because they didn't make the playoff last year and have so much money invested. And they also need to get Arch a good offensive line so they can run the ball a little bit better and get going. Desperate because like as we mentioned, this next year is natty or bust essentially for the Ducks. And LSU, you can't tell me Lane Kiffin will allow a season where his quarterback's not protected in his first season with LSU not making the playoffs. So I'm interested to see how high up his number goes and at what point do one or two of the schools back out of the negotiations because the number's gotten too crazy even for a kid his level. What's your next transfer you want to talk about?
Let's go other side of the line of scrimmage. Let's do Damon Wilson Jr. out of Missouri. So he was a former 5-star player 2 years ago in the 2024 class. And then he's labeled the second best defensive player in the portal. He's an edge rusher. Now, the one knock on him that I've heard is he's a sheer pass rusher. Now he's elite at pass rushing. I believe he didn't play a full 12 games this season due to injury, and he still had 9 sacks in his limited play. But he also only had 9 tackles. So that's kind of, they say, he'll get to the quarterback and he'll rush him. But at the same time, you're not going to get a lot of help in the run game out of him. You're not going to get a lot of help in the screen game. So I would expect a team that's like solely in on just rushing the quarterback to be after him. That feels like a Lane Kiffin LSU guy. They seem to be the early favorite, just not of anything he's said, but out of what LSU kind of like that. He's not Harold Perkins in the way he plays, but in his ability to rush the quarterback. Sounds like LSU is going to need to fill that hole. But from what I've heard, he's all SEC, and then like the big ACC teams like Miami was a big one. A lot of people project that he could put on some weight and become like a Ruben Bain. Obviously, Miami's going to lose him, but they also have the credibility of like, look what we developed. This guy's a beast, as we have all seen and are going to see here in a few days. So it'll be interesting. This is another arms race because there's not a lot of top end edge rushers left. We had Chaz Coleman, who was the best. He went to Tennessee. A lot of other of the top tier D linemen have committed elsewhere. So teams desperate for an edge rusher. He entered the portal pretty early, but he has really not revealed like where his head's at all. And I think that's beneficial to him. And the reason why I want to talk about him, a lot of guys, especially high level guys, will either enter the do not contact tag or they'll commit quickly elsewhere. He's kind of taken that opposite path, even though he's a top dog, where he's really biding his time. And I wonder if we'll see what the number is, but I almost wonder if that's just driving up his value because as each day goes, there are going to be teams with money that get desperate. And it would be interesting to see how much he can raise his value. But a big name to look out for. He was in the SEC from the South. Sounds like he will stay out there, but a pretty elite pass rusher who just didn't get the recognition I think he deserved being on a Missouri team. Their defense wasn't really anything to call home about. And I think part of his difficulty stopping the run, as people claim, when you are the only bright spot on a defense, they'll just run the ball away from you. I'm a Lions fan. I've watched people, Aiden Hutchinson doesn't make enough tackles. They just run the ball away from him because our defense isn't good. He's kind of in that boat. So I think putting him on a team like Miami where whoever's across from him is also going to be equally as elite, that's where you see a guy like this become a Ruben Bain. So it'd be kind of fun to see if he chooses Miami in that case. But
I've always said if I was an NFL team looking for a corner, I wouldn't look for the corner who has the most interceptions or like the most, maybe the most punch outs, but I'd look for the corner who has the least amount of stats, but the most amount of snaps because that means the other team's avoiding throwing the ball his way at all times. That means Christian Gonzalez was this when he played college football. He has very little stats, but it's because no one was throwing his way. And they didn't have to because there were very few corners that good, like Christian Gonzalez. Other than that, out of Florida State, Mandrell and Daryl Desir are entering the portal. These are two guys who Mike Norvell called building blocks for Florida State entering next season. They actually renegotiated their contracts for next season already. They came to financial terms, then there was a discussion in the buyout of the contract, and that was a sticking point. They're both officially in the portal. They both started out as like not lower tier prospects, but not blue chip 5-star kids. And they are just absolutely elite of the elite. And they were going to be a big part of FSU's year next year if they were going to be a good team. Now, I would imagine they are going to be since they went to FSU together, they're leaving FSU together. I have no reason to believe otherwise. I would imagine they're a tandem. They're going to go wherever they can play together. And I'm telling you, there is going to be some team that would take two elite defensive linemen like them. And then there's Tion Gray that transferred out of Oregon. Just a massive dude. I know you really like him.
Yeah, 6'6", 340, a 19-year-old. Yeah, I like him. Stick him in the middle of his defense.
Size matters.
That was one of those. Yeah, that was one of those blows. Like when you see that, when you get the notification that he entered the portal, that was one I was like, damn. That was one that hurt. But it sounds like Notre Dame is the team. I don't believe he's, as of right now, the time of recording, I don't believe he's fully committed. But from everything I've heard, it's but a done deal. Huge pickup for Notre Dame. This is kind of like the last infinity stone for their defense. They're going to have an elite secondary as usual. They're going to have really good linebacker play as usual. They have good edge rushers as usual. But they were missing that big body in the middle that can just stuff the run. That was something that Notre Dame didn't have last season, and then the year before, something that they were intermediate at doing. But to have an official, true nose tackle, and for anyone wondering about nose tackles under Dan Lanning, Google Georgia nose tackles from 2020 to 2023. Look at those names, look where they were drafted, and then see that they're all in the Pro Bowl this past year. Dan knows how to get them, find them, develop them. This is a guy that Dan fell in love with in high school. It was like, I have to have this guy. He's developed at Oregon for 2 years now. Unfortunately, won't have the opportunity to play there, but he will be at a Notre Dame team that has very elite program. And unfortunately for Farbod and I think this is a name that when Notre Dame is playing a big playoff game next year, this is a name you will probably hear a lot about. But big pickup for Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame. Really filled probably their biggest hole from this past year, which to be able to do that is, that's every team's dream, right? That's why the portal exists. It was a win-win. It's a kid that was looking to start somewhere because he wasn't going to be able to on his team. It's a team that needed a hole to become what they want to be, which is a national championship team. Match made in heaven, unfortunately. But anytime you have a 6'6", 340, 19-year-old, I think every coach's eyes perk up. He's what? So that was a big pickup. And then one last note for the portal before we move on here. Today, as you're listening to this, January 15th, it's a Thursday. Tomorrow, January 16th, Friday, the end of the day is the end of the transfer portal window for everybody that's not an Indiana or a Miami football player. Indiana and Miami will get an exception. So players on that team will get 5 extra days. So up through the first to enter the portal, teams will be able to work with them. But you have to have entered the portal by the 16th. Players will be committed mostly by then, but paperwork comes in late. So you might hear like people committing places on the 17th, 18th, 19th. That doesn't mean they were entering late. But yeah, so if you're someone who's tracking your team and you're thinking, oh man, like I don't want this guy to leave, you just got to make it till the weekend. You got to make it till Saturday. You can wake up Saturday morning and your roster will be safe from any more entrants. Unless you're an Indiana or Miami fan, then you got to be a little nervous then.
Well, so your roster won't be the same. It's not guaranteed. You can still bring guys in. You just won't
can't
lose anybody
guys.
else. Yeah. So you could theoretically, I think up until like OTAs, bring guys in or whatever. I don't know when the deadline is. But I'm going to just quickly go over one thing and then we'll move on to our last topic. Your soapbox. The National Football Foundation's College Football Hall of Fame class was released. Congrats to some player, Aaron Donald, Mark Ingram, Eric Weddle, and Dominican Sue, and then 2 of the best coaches ever in Gary Patterson and Chris Peterson. They never won national titles, but they are elite coaches in college football, and I'm glad they got the recognition that they deserve. Is there anybody in this list that you want to talk about?
James Laurinaitis was the first time I ever saw somebody hit someone else and been like, I think I was probably 7 or 8 years old. James Laurinaitis, I don't know who he hit. It was probably Javon Ringer from Michigan State. Just plowed him. And that was like my first memory of being like, that's football. And like, really like, oh man, like that's sick. So shout out James Laurinaitis. He kind of was the one that awoken me to what is football in terms of the physicality of it.
Yeah. So congrats to those folks. There's a long conversation, and it's more of an off-season conversation of who deserves to be in the College Football Hall of Fame, who's not in it, who would you put in it, active coaches, whatnot. But let's get into your soapbox. I'm going to try to make this a regular thing because you have wonderful takes at all times, and sometimes they don't make this. They don't see the light of the day on the show. So I want to give. I want to give you. Here's the box. Stand on it.
All right, let's get up here. All right, so something I've been talking to Farbod, some other friends about, been thinking a lot about lately is what's the new recipe for success in this era of college football? Old era, the Saban days, it was elite talent, obviously, and then elite depth. It was just a constant, you could be good year after year after year because you could just stack these elite recruiting classes. And every year you just iron sharpens iron in practice. And you just tell the group, say, hey, look at all the guys a year older than you, follow their lead. You just say it to everybody. So everybody's just acting like the 5-star seniors every year. And you could do that. And that was the recipe for success. And obviously Nick Saban perfected it. A lot of other teams, had some success too. USC was in there early in the days. Florida had a nice little stretch with Urban Meyer, Ohio State. But in this new era, we've seen teams that haven't been successful in a long time or teams that have never been successful find success, which definitely makes me think, okay, there's definitely a new recipe for success in this version, this portal version, this NIL version, this big playoff version of college football. And I was trying to kind of figure out what are the characteristics that are going to lead to success. As a team, what do you need to do that? And that also led me down some other rabbit holes I'll save. But I'll start with kind of a brief overview of what I think. And then I'm going to ask you some questions here, Farbod. What I've kind of picked up, what I've learned from Michigan a couple years ago, Ohio State last year, Indiana this year. First things first, in this era of college football, you need 22 high-level, high-end starters. There's no more, you can't get away with a lacking position group anymore like you used to be able to. There were years where Saban's teams didn't have the best quarterbacks, but they were still winning national championships. There were years where the D-line wasn't as elite as we're used to, and they were still winning national championships. With the transfer portal, discovered talent or unappreciated talent can bounce around. And also, really good players on lesser teams aren't just stuck there anymore. They can bounce to the elite teams, which in my opinion, is kind of allowed for teams to build and stack really elite starting 22 players. Almost said starting 11 like it was a soccer team. 2 players. And I think that's first and foremost. Every time we've seen really good playoff teams, but they always have 1 or 2 flaws in the starting 22 that come back to bite them. And if you look at the Michigan team 2 years ago, they really didn't have a single flaw on that roster. You look at Ohio State last year, not a damn flaw on that roster. That roster was insane. Look at Indiana this year, not a damn flaw on this team. I think my first thing in success in this area, you got to have 22 elite starters now. You can't mask a bad quarterback with a good run game anymore. That's not going to fly in this era.
No, and I think, yeah, you and I have had a lot of conversations about this in the last couple of days. It was part of a theory I think I threw out to you after the show on Monday, but I was wondering, at what point are we going to see coaches saying, I don't need a 25-man recruiting class. I don't need a 30-man recruiting class to that's old college football. We're not stacking rosters anymore. We're not stacking depth. Look at Oregon. They just lost 7, 8 depth piece defensive linemen who were primed to start next year for the Ducks, and they are leaving. I think you look at the most recent classes in college football, and I know USC finished with the top rated class, and yes, they got some elite 5-star level players. But they also brought in 35 players, and that is one of the reasons that they were ranked number 1 in recruiting. Alabama brought in 23. Alabama's average rating per recruit, according to 24/7, was 92.82. Oregon brought in 21, so less. Their average rating per recruit was higher, 93.39. USC's average rating per recruit of the 35 players was 91.8. I say that to say, not that USC brought in worse players than the other two, but almost at what point is the juice not worth the squeeze of I'm not going to bring in 35 players knowing that most of them or a lot of them are going to be renegotiating with me, asking for contracts even though when they haven't done a damn thing for my team yet other than serve as practice squad players, and then ask and tell me that they're going to enter the portal in 2 years after I've been pouring into them. I wonder if we are entering a day and age of college football, like you said, college football teams, especially the teams in the top 15, top 10, especially the top 10, those programs do not have the luxury of having a down year. They cannot afford that. So part of that is just that's the reason Miami will never home grow their quarterback. They're always going to be looking for the best transfer portal quarterback they can. LSU, I doubt, will ever home grow their quarterback. Oregon, I doubt, will ever home grow their quarterback again. Unless it's like a special case scenario, they're always going to be looking for a transfer portal kid. So I think that's shift that started two years ago. And now we're starting to see teams say, all right, well, my defensive tackle was good, but there's this kid in the portal. So let me if I lose my current guy, it's fine. I need him. He would take me from good to great. My running back is good, but man, Caden Durham, I know he went back to LSU. He's in the portal. I need to go get him. Receiver is good, but I need to go get this guy because he's great. Like you're absolutely right. It's almost more important to have 22 elite players and then surround them. Now, your depth can't be bad because injuries are just part of football. Those kids will play for your team and probably play a lot of snaps. Your second string. Your priority isn't stacking rosters anymore, and I like the soapbox.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And part of what got me thinking about, I know saying needing elite starters is not a groundbreaking take. And as I continue down this take, you'll hear more well thought out ideas that you might not be thinking. But the reason why I think it's worth talking about is you go look at some of these quarterbacks that Alabama took to championships. Like these are not like Jake Coker was like the starting
Yeah,
quarterback at Alabama, and there was probably 90 quarterbacks in the country who could have done more than he did there, and he was still playing in championship. Blake Sims, a lot of these guys, and a big thing about stacking talent these days, and with it being dead, look at these like proof of it here. These are I compiled the list of the top programs from recruiting the last 3 years. So these are I'm going to give you 10 or just shy of 10 teams because Miami's one of them, but they're like we don't know their transfer out scenario because they're still playing. Listen to how many transfers have happened from the top recruiting programs. Oregon and Michigan have each lost 27 players. Penn State 47. Now, I know there was a coaching change, but still that's a jarring number. Ohio State 33, Alabama 21, USC 20, Texas 26, Oklahoma 28. We're just the only one under 20 of the top recruiting teams. And like I said, Miami has 8 in the portal so far. We'll see what happens in their 5-day window after the championship. These programs have recruited in a way that would normally stack talent. The reason why I grabbed them is because they've been top 15 every single year of the last 3 years. They're also the programs that are losing the most talent right now. And the reason being is because they have really talented players buried on depth charts. And to Farbod's point, when they think they might start next year, but then you grab someone in the portal, these kids don't want to sit around. Whether it's the right or wrong decision is a different discussion, but the reality is they don't want to sit around for more than 2 seasons and not play. Like these guys expect to be starting year 2, if you're lucky, and they're patient by year 3. Now, in the olden days, some of these guys don't ever start until year 4 or even year 5. And in today's world, they want to play year 2. They want to for sure be a starter by year 3. And with the portal, they know, do I really want to sit one more year at Oklahoma, or do I want to enter the portal and I can go to Virginia Tech and start day 1? They're going to take and I can't blame them. They're going to go take the starting job. It's also going to be worth more NIL money than if they were to stay on the bench. But it has made stacking talent harder, which leads me to my next point. And I think like strategic recruiting is going to be a really important factor moving forward. I've done a lot of thinking about like how you were saying, if you look at those Alabama Saban teams, they were snagging 30 plus players every year. And he was basically just using those guys to replace all the graduating seniors and then using it to replace kind of the walk-ons or the guys that weren't very good. And he was just stacking this talent, finding the best and moving forward. As we've seen with all these guys transferring out, that's just, it's almost, I don't want to say worthless, but the value of recruiting depth is meaningless. Like you said, you're going to bring in these kids who are not going to play. You know, they're not going to play for a minimum of a year. Most of them too. There's no reason to go get 35 and then have to spend the next 2 years trying to figure out how to pay them. You know, they're going to keep threatening the portal. They're going to want more money out of you, and they're not really providing a lot of value. So I think strategic recruiting is going to be big. I think we're going to start seeing a lot more high teens classes. And I also think a strategy that we're going to start seeing is breaking up each class kind of by position groups. Okay, this year, this is my running back, interior O-line, offensive tackle class, where I'm really going to hone in and recruit 12 guys in those 3 classes. And then if there's elite players that want to be here, I'll grab them elsewhere. But there's never going to be more than 16, 17, 18 players. And then the next year, okay, this is my quarterback, wide receiver, DB year. Next year, okay, this is my D-line, linebacker year, tight end year. And I think you're going to see that cycle because you don't, if you get too deep at, let's say your D-line, you have 4 senior starters. If you have 4 stars that are going to be juniors, they're not going to sit behind that starting senior D-line and then take over next year. Like, even though as a fan, it's like, oh man, just wait one more year. You're going to be a stud for us. They don't want to wait 1 year, and they don't have to. They can jump in the portal and go elsewhere. There's no point in getting 4 elite D linemen 3 years straight because realistically, the next 8 are all going to transfer out. You're better off like getting an elite D line in 1 year and then really not touching D line for a year or two. Maybe get 1 or 2 guys you really like, but not really worrying about it until 2 years down the road when those guys are juniors. Then you go kind of get a big D line class. It'll be really interesting. I think strategic recruiting is a step that you're going to start seeing these teams take.
Now, don't get me wrong. I think still having the most good players is a very, very valuable thing in college football because depth has still been something that Kirby Smart and a lot of the top coaches have complained about because their rosters keep getting pillaged by lesser teams. I think there's an aspect of, I don't know, I hate to always bring it back to Oregon, but it's what we know best. This past year, 2 years ago, they brought in like 37 players, transfer portal and recruiting class combined. And then the year before that, they brought in more players. And that was really Dan Lanning's first class to really jumpstart his version of Oregon football. And look at where they are now. This year, they brought in 21 kids. And what we noticed as how they were recruiting was quality over quantity, go for the big blue chip guys. And yes, they struck out more than they hit, honestly, on especially some quarterbacks. But their class ended up being really good. And a lot of it was because they went for quality guys that they could probably justify paying for 4 years, keep on the roster. And yes, you'll probably lose 5 to 7 of these guys to the portal, but these are guys that you envision right away playing for the team in 1 to 3 years. So I completely agree with you. I think there's just an aspect of that it's a new college football, so we'll have to wait and see how teams approach it. But I think the days of stacking recruiting classes, like the old adage always was, wait till he gets his guys in and starts like it's not year 1, but wait till year 3 or 4 where he stacked 3 recruiting classes together and see that's his version of his team. Where now that's not going to happen anymore. By the way, one last thing. What is Rich Rod doing in West Virginia? Sorry to completely hijack this. He brought in 83 total recruits and transfers last year. And then this year, this cycle, you want to guess the amount that he has, or do you know?
76.
You went one number above it. I thought I would have to tell you here, but
I thought I saw 75 the other day, so I was like, oh, okay, maybe they got more.
In 2 years, he's brought in 150 something players to play at West Virginia. Obviously, he's lost plenty to portal too, but this is also a sign, going back to what we said. Recruiting and rebuilding a team isn't the old days either. You can jumpstart or rebuild much faster. You can bring in new players right away. This West Virginia team looks nothing like that the Neil Brown West Virginia team of just 2 years ago. A year and a half ago. A year and 2 months ago, we saw Neil Brown coach West Virginia. And this roster looks nothing like his team that he had because they were rebuilding it. And that goes back to once you have a roster you can put together, then you can start getting aggressive of getting going quality over quantity. Great soapbox, Jace. We'll do this more because there's great topics. Honestly, this conversation is probably going to be had a lot more in the off season too. As I mentioned at the beginning of the show, we will be previewing the national title game on Sunday. I believe the plan is for that show to come out Sunday afternoon to evening. If not, check it out Monday morning, and then we will do an instant reaction to the national title after. We're going to stay up late for you guys. We're going to be talking about the national title game on Monday night. That show will be released Monday night or Tuesday morning. And then bit of housekeeping as we are heading to the off season, or I know people don't want to call it the off season, but it's the time of year where football is not played. We will be slowly transitioning back to a one show a week schedule for our off season cycle. Will be available, unlike last off season though, to hop on at any moment if there's breaking news for an emergency pod during the week. So I'm not saying we're only signing up for one show per week for the next 6 months. There will be multiple shows per week. It's just not going to be a regular thing until the season starts back up. Flag for Discussion is taking some time to recharge after our first season, refuel. We have so much coming and planned for this off season. I'm stoked about that. Jace, almost first season down. How are we feeling?
I feel great. It's been an invigorating first season. We're going to get either a Mario Cristobal first-time national championship in our first year, or we're going to get Kurt Zignetti and Indiana first-time national championship, which something that didn't really hit me until you asked me this question. It's kind of special. The first national champion of our first year is kind of a special one. So that kind of gave me a new lens watching this game on Monday. Obviously, we're sad it's not our Ducks, but it'll be fun to watch. You know, this is our first F4D national championship game. Just exciting to have.
Well, when we're on episode 7,000, we'll make it a trivia question. Who's the national champion in our first season as a pod? Well, this was episode 61, so we got a long ways to get to before we get to episode 7,000. Tonight we'll be here all the way through that. But thank you so much for tuning in. If you liked what you heard, if you enjoyed all the conversations, make sure you are responding to us. Please reach out. If you have any comments on Jace's soapbox or our conversations about the Hall of Fame to Dante Moore, please reach out. We're on Twitter at F4 discussion, on TikTok at Flag4 discussion. We're also on YouTube. You can see our beautiful faces on YouTube at Flag for Discussion spelled out. And if you don't like our faces, we kind of have voices for radio instead of faces for TV. I get that. You can check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts at Flag for Discussion spelled out. Thank you so much for tuning in. This has been a lovely episode where we didn't break any games down, but we'll get back into our old structures of breaking down games on Sunday. We'll see you then. Thank you so much for tuning in. From myself, Farbod and Jace, my lovely partner, Jace Hatfield. This has been Flag for Discussion.